Okay, this is the summary of A Dark Brown Dog. There is a short story by Stephen Crane about a dog who is adopted and mistreated by a young boy's family. A child meets a small, submissive, dark brown dog with a piece of rope tied around its neck and takes it home. The boy and the dog become friends, but the child's alcoholic father and other family members abuse the dog, which the child sometimes hits as well. First, a child is standing on a street corner when a small dark brown dog with a short rope around its neck appears. He and the child look at each other, and the child calls out to him. The dog is excited to be petted. He becomes so enthusiastic that he almost knocks the child over. At this, the child hits him on the head. Unfortunately for the dog, though, the child cannot always be around. When he is asleep, the dog sometimes cries in a corner and is then chased around the kitchen and hit. Sometimes the child, too, hits the dog. The dog always receives these blows with deep humility, and he forgives the child immediately afterward. The dog is always sympathetic to the child. If the child feels unhappy, he lays his head on the dog's back. No other member of the family becomes close to the dog, and thus they underfeed him and feel exasperated that the dog is frightened of them. One day, the child's father decides that it would be fun to throw the dog out of the window. So he picks it up and does so. The child begins to cry and crawls downstairs to find his friend. When his family finds him later, he is seated next to the body of the dog. Okay, now it's time for the analysis. The most important symbols of this short story are the dog that represents the recently freed African American slaves suffering under the governments of the southern United States. The dog practices a strategy of accommodation, never defending itself against those who abuse it. The child represents the white southern population that favored integration. The dog has convinced him that it belongs in the house as part of the family. The family represents the rest of southern society. They despise and abuse the dog, and they don't want him at their home. Rope. When the dog first appears, it has a rope around its neck. This is a reference to the relatively new condition of freedom to the African American population of the South. Talking about themes, I have to mention complicity. When the child and the dog have a good relationship in the beginning. On the other hand, the family's silent complicity in the abuse of the dog, culminating in the dog's death. Also, power imbalance. While the father holds the most power of any character, the dog holds the least, and the child who protects the dog holds only a limited account. The raising action appears when the conflict continues to increase in intensity while the outcome remains uncertain. The falling action or resolution means the movement if events towards the success or victory of one side over the other is evident and clear. When the child cried and shouted at his father went outside to see his friend, the dog. As a conclusion, when the conflict is brought to a close, in the story, it was how the child was sitting by the body of his dark brown friend, talking about his friend, right? Talking about my personal opinion, I think this is a very interesting book because it tells how a child and a dog can remain together despite the opposite opinion of the rest of the family. The complicity between them is incredible. The dog deserves to be paired because it seemed that it was looking for a friend who protects it. Unfortunately, the child doesn't have a good behavior about the dog, but less than the rest of the family. I would want that every person around the world be aware about animals because they feel like us as human beings. But there are many people who don't care about it. The tragedy of the dog's death was unnecessary for me because the dog was enjoying the house, but the father was not aware about what he was doing. Talking about the moral lesson, I can say that love and trust come to mind when thinking open or relationship with one another. There are many types of these bonds, whether it be between mother and child or owner a pet. The story of a dark brown dog is one on how some relationships can leave us with a dark place in your heart. The relationship between these characters is one of who's pulling the strings. The abuse has been passed down from the father to son. This story leaves an emptiness with the unsettling thorn of events.